Slava Ukraini! With Vans Without Borders, a humanitarian aid team who heads to the hotspot areas of Ukraine to give out everything and anything to those in need. So I'm Jack, and this is
Phantom,
Justin,
Edward,
Nick.
We're in Irpin on the road to Bucha, where Russian troops massacred hundreds of villagers. This is by far the worst devastation we've seen since we've come to Ukraine.
One of the most devastated areas of Ukraine I've been to was Bucha and Irpin back in April 2022. Almost every house was damaged, if not completely flattened, or riddled with bullet holes and shrapnel.
We've got a lorry riddled with bullet holes, so God knows what happens to the occupants. We can't even have a look inside because we're worried it might be booby trapped. But it's just swerved in the middle of the road. It's a travesty, really. Like, who's going to survive something like that?
The people there, what remained, were scared, petrified. They'd just come out of Russian occupation. And it's where we first met our friend Artem. Artem is a Ukrainian soldier who very kindly brought us into Bucha and Irpin before the residents who had been evacuated could return. And thanks to him, we're able to do an initial recce. We saw multiple vehicles riddled with bullets and blood on the back seats, as well as the usual booby traps, landmines and unexploded bombs. It was heart-wrenching to go there.
Shots through the driving seat, shots through the main screen. It looks like there's refugees fleeing or something. You can see they've got their stuff in the back here.
With the rapid invasion into Bucha and Irpin from the Russian forces, the civilians either fled or were interned. Now, lots of them were interned in communal areas. They weren't allowed into their private homes. Some were lucky enough to flee, others were able to be evacuated as part of peace talks and refugee schemes. Those who were unlucky enough to stay, as I mentioned, were interned or worse. We've heard the stories and we've spoken to civilians on the ground who have confirmed multiple Ukrainian women were raped, and in one instance, the rapes were so prevalent in Bucha and Irpin that the local prostitutes actually went and serviced the Russian soldiers to try and stop them raping the local women. We've heard about, from civilians, medieval tortures or execution methods where men were beaten to death over days. Well, there's no word for it. It's devastating. It's something which will stay with me till I die.
They stayed here because they didn't manage to get into Kiev, so they stayed here for a week. What they were doing during that week, they were killing civilians, they were raping women and even small children.
А жители города ворвались в подвал, они их все раздели, всех, женщин и мужчин. Это уже они мне рассказывали, они их выставили, обыскали, в общем, унижали и избивали.
They basically, almost under every single body, they put a grenade, so you can't touch them or evacuate them properly. Russians tried to get to Kiev through Bucha and Irpin, and our army has stopped them.
This is all of the wreckage they've managed to scrape up from Bucha and Irpin following the rocket attack. So I think it's a blend of Russian tanks and civilian vehicles. You can see the mortar shells on there. It smells very strange. I've not smelled anything like that before. Not sure what's in there, but you can see there's like a tank turret there with the gun.
Last year when we were in Bucha and Irpin in June, I was driving around with the team to try and condition them a little bit to Ukraine, because Bucha and Irpin were safe at the time, but I find it quite a good place to take new members of the team so they can start to appreciate being in a war zone, particularly if they've not been in one before. But as we were driving around and showing the guys the devastation, the heartbreak, the misery there, we saw a guy in a wheelchair with his family in a bombed out remains of a house. So we went over, introduced ourselves, asked if he needed any help, because ultimately that's what we're here to do, is help as many people as possible.
Just been shown the basement where Bogdan's family lived, and basically when the Russians shelled the area, they hid in the basement, and the matriarch of the family, she told us she'd been having to go at her husband for years for digging it, wanted him to fill it in, but it actually saved their life, and they were down there, but unfortunately the house fell on top of them, so they had to communicate to other people in Bucha to come and rescue them. Now this is where they're currently living at the moment because they haven't been able to rebuild their house at all. And then they eventually were freed. This is the family. We've given them some supplies, and this is Bogdan over here. And they were able to get help from the local community to get him out because they weren't able to lift him out in his wheelchair. Unfortunately, he burnt his shoulder when coming out, but he's recovering now. And this is the basement the family was hiding in and still living at the moment. This is absolutely tiny, and there was 7 of them in here, including Bogdan with his wheelchair. We learnt he needed a new wheelchair, which we secured for him. We learnt he was also the chess champion for the Bucha region, so we got him a new chess set, which he was over the moon with. And one of our guys, Steve, actually gave him, the next time we came back, a chess set that his father had left him. It's a huge sentimental value, and Bogdan really appreciated that too. So we've also arranged some other bits through other groups for Bogdan and supported the family really since last June. But we went back to give them a speaker. So we got the request for a speaker because Bogdan used to be part of a group that helps children and adults with disabilities in the Bucha region. And unfortunately, the group had been unable to meet due to the war, and they're looking to reconvene, well, as soon as possible. And they asked if I could supply a speaker so they could start having events, starting to, give the guys a bit of fun and try and return to their lives before the war, try and distract themselves from the ongoing crisis. So Bogdan's also the chess champion for the region. Later, after the houses were destroyed here in Bucha, the rebuild process has begun. This was Bogdan's house here. Now a construction site, and hopefully they're going to build him something that looks like that. As you can see, that's what the street looked like 6 months ago. So one of the chaps on the site has shown us in.
You remember backyard where we're sitting?
Yeah. So it's nowhere near finished yet, but the basics have been put together.
Цю вже війну, котра тягнеться не перше століття, ми повинні поставити крапку, щоб мої діти і внуки вже не знали і не боялися, що Росія знову щось може зробити.
When we were in Donetsk Oblast, we stayed with an army unit who helped us deliver the aid and find out where's safe to go to. It's so important if you're operating in dangerous areas in Ukraine that you liaise with the army. If you don't, you might end up going to somewhere which is actually an active battlefront. So while we were there at the base, one of the soldiers very kindly gave me an interview and told me a little bit about what the unit gets up to on a day-to-day basis. So today we saw the devastation around this area. We saw the bombed buildings, we saw the civilians living with literally nothing. No food, no money, no electricity. How does that make you feel?
Спочатку це була якась така лють майже тваринна, але це емоції, тому зараз ці емоції ми намагаємося, воїни української армії, намагаємося перетворити в помсту, розраховану, холодну, жорстку помсту. Тому що за кожну слезинку наших дітей, за кожну слезинку наших матерей, сестер, коханих, ми повинні помститися цієї навалі, котра зараз називається Росія.
And if you could say one thing to the Russian president Vladimir Putin, what would it be?
Я вважаю, що він не розуміє слів, тому я би зробив одну дію. Shot.
And how can Britain help Ukraine?
По-перше, я повинен подякувати Британії і народу Британії за ту допомогу, яку вони для нас роблять. Це дуже важливо, тому що насправді без цієї допомоги я не знаю, як би ми далі справлялися з цим ворогом. Але нам треба більше допомоги. І не тільки в об'єму, але й швидше, тому що кожен день затримки допомоги – це кожен день, можливо, хтось гине з цих хлопців. Тому ще раз дякую. І якщо буде ваша ласка, більше допомоги, важкого озброєння і швидше.
So you can see in Ukraine there's loads of tree stumps everywhere. And what it is they're cutting all the trees down to burn as fuel because they haven't got any power. So they have heating in the houses or they sit outside. So what locals will do, they'll come out and they'll just cut random trees down, but it's either that or freeze to death in the minus conditions. We've returned to Chernihiv almost a year later. The area we came to before looks exactly the same because people don't have the money to start rebuilding. Unlike in Kiev, the vast majority of these houses are still in disrepair. So we came back to the village not knowing what we'd find. We had a load of food in the back, but it looks like there's even more people here now still living in the rubble as their homes have not been rebuilt. So we're going to go resupply at a store because we've left about 50 people without food. Do that, come back, wrap up, then back to Kiev. So this is what we call supermarket sweep. Is grab as many trolleys as you can, fill it with as much food as possible. This is what we do. We don't leave anyone hungry. We told the guys to go back in and keep warm, and we'd be back in an hour, and they're all now out waiting for us. And a much bigger queue than before too. But that's how desperate people are for food. They're going to be out in minus conditions, freezing. That's okay. Much better bridges than what we're accustomed to. So we've just driven through the city of Izium. Now we were in Izium about 1-2 weeks after it was liberated in 2022. And it's always heartbreaking driving through it. There's not many people left, and what people you see are still picking through the remains of what were their homes. Every building is badly damaged. It's not been rocket attacked, it's been shot through or blasted. It's just heartbreaking. This was a city which housed tens of thousands of people. And you see blocks of flats which would have housed maybe 500,000 people completely smashed. There's no chance people will be able to return to their previous lives. How many of us have all of our life's savings or memories in our homes and taken away in a second? Behind me you can see the memorial in Kiev dedicated to the victims of Holodomor. So Holodomor was the ethnic cleansing by the Soviet Union of the Ukrainian people between 1932 to 1933. So the Soviets, in an effort to try and eradicate the Ukrainian people, engineered a famine which killed between an estimated 6 to 10 million people. These people starved to death. There were horrible stories which came out of what people had to do to survive at the time, and it was a very dark moment in Ukrainian history. And it serves now as a reminder to the Ukrainians of what will happen if Russians take over their country again. So already in this war, over 100,000 Ukrainian people have died. Millions have been displaced, and that number is just going to keep going higher and higher and higher as the war continues. So this is another small memorial dedicated to the victims of Holodomor. As you can see, it's a very malnourished young girl, and these were some of the images which came out of Holodomor. Very malnourished children. There are all sorts of reports at the time and in the history books, and it's, you know, a very dark time, pure evil, the Soviet Union mass murdering millions and millions of people. It's heartbreaking, and it's heartbreaking to see them trying to do it again.